morning, everyone, and delighted to be here. And as I was thinking this morning, looking around, first of all, it is lovely that we're able to be back in person. But we're in a transition ourselves at the moment, so we're now transitioning from having all these conferences in person to having them online, to now doing this hybrid. So excuse us while we experiment with this format as well, and hopefully both those of you in person today, but everybody online, and I know there's multiple of hundreds of people online as well, you'll find today's session interesting, informative and engaging, as I said, both people who are here in person and those of you online. So, as I said, it's great that we've been able to facilitate both, and it's great the level of interest, as I said, in both as well. So, as Brian said, the title of today's event is Creating Ireland's Climate Future, and we're going to consider how we implement, and this is going to be a theme of today, but it's implementation of climate actions at the scale and pace necessary to secure a livable and sustainable Ireland for everybody by 2050. And we need to recognise that we need to plan now in order to realise future benefits. And these will be through changes in our settlement patterns, land use, transport, and of course behaviours. And as part of all of this, there's a need to be decisive, there's a need to be courageous, and ultimately meticulous in implementing policies, plans and programmes that support this transformation. So this morning we're going to be setting the scene, addressing current climate policy, climate science and the greenhouse gas emissions projections data that the EPA published this morning. Our second session is planning for a climate neutral and resilient Ireland by 2030 and beyond. And here we're going to consider how that vision will be achieved in terms of strategic planning for both the built and natural environments. And lastly, our third and final session will focus on the scale and pace of change needed to achieve climate neutrality and climate resilience. So maybe starting with the science aspect, the need for urgency and purpose in our discussions about climate change has never been greater. Since we last met, we've had 3 landmark reports from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they're all clear and they're all stark in their messages and calls for action. Last August, the report from the IPCC Working Group 1 on the physical science basis reaffirmed and strengthened the findings of previous reports on the science of climate change. It provided new and important insights into the current state of the global climate system, how it is changing, the role of human influence, and possible climate futures. In February of this year, the report of IPCC Working Group 2 on climate change, impacts, adaptation and vulnerability showed the unequivocal evidence of climate change globally and the impacts on human and natural systems. And again, its message is clear. Delaying the action on adaptation and mitigation will miss a brief and rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. The need for integration of climate change adaptation into decision-making and planning across all sectors of the economy and society and across all regions were also highlighted. And I think this is a message that we have been reiterating, because sometimes what you find is that adaptation gets lost in this discussion, and really it needs to be on an equal footing with mitigation. And we're privileged to hear from the co-chair of this report from the IPCC later this morning in a keynote address. And the IPCC report also aligns with the findings of jointly funded research by the EPA, Met Éireann and the Marine Institute, and published last August. The latest status of Ireland's climate report showed that global warming has resulted in Ireland's climate becoming wetter and warmer. Sea level rise, increased ocean acidity and higher ocean temperatures are also observed in our oceans and coastal areas. And Ireland's ocean and terrestrial ecosystems are responding to these changes, resulting in changes in ocean species and a longer growing season on land. So these changes are happening not only at a global scale, but we're also seeing them at a national scale. And last month's Working Group 3 report on climate mitigation outlines the nature and extent of the causes of climate change at a global level and reinforces the urgent need for action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The data is clear in its message that the average annual global greenhouse gas emissions were at their highest level in human history in the period 2010 to 2019, although the growth rate has slowed. Unless there are immediate and deep emission reductions across all sectors, the 1.5 degree target is beyond reach. But there are options available now in every sector that can halve overall emissions by 2030. But the time for action is now. And we're mindful of these messages as we hold today's event and as the EPA publishes our greenhouse gas projections report for 2021 to 2040. And again, as Brian said, Stephen Tracy will be talking in more detail about this report later in today's session. And the data shows that planned climate policies and measures, if fully implemented, could deliver up to 28% emission reductions by 2030. As such, Ireland could comply with our current 2030 EU emission reduction target, but only if committed measures are implemented and delivered as planned, as well as using available flexibilities. So this includes achieving the Climate Action Plan 2021 afforestation rate of 8,000 hectares per annum. And considering we're at around 2,000 to 2,500 hectares per annum, that is a considerable challenge. The report also tells us that total greenhouse gas emissions are estimated to have increased by 6% in 2021, rebounding from the impact of COVID. It is projected that the impact of planned reduction measures will start seeing emission reductions by 2023. But again, this is all on the basis of implementation. So the projections show us the scale of policy development and speed of implementation needed. And there really is a significant gap between the ambition in the Climate Act and the realisation of the necessary actions to deliver on that ambition. This is something the EPA, I suppose, has been calling out for many years. So we can't keep talking and not acting. We really need to be implementing, and that, as I said, is every single sector. So the data shows that a step up in both the implementation of actions already set out in the policies and plans and identification of new measures is needed. And the other pieces were very clear that it's all sectors and there needs to be work done across all of the sectors. In particular, we have called out the agriculture sector. A methane emissions reduction of almost 30% may be required to achieve a 22% reduction in agriculture emissions compared to 2018, as set out in the Climate Action Plan. The sector must clearly set out how this will be achieved to address uncertainty regarding its ability to deliver even the lower end of the range of its sectoral targets within this ever-shortening time period to 2030. With regard to electricity generation, and we're going to be hearing from Paddy Hayes of the ESB later today, but within this sector we're seeing a return to higher levels of coal used in electricity generation. This is partly to meet growing energy demand as well as a result of current geopolitical impacts on energy prices. Increased coal use in 2021 and growing energy demand, including from data centres, threaten to negatively impact the achievement of the national reduction targets for the energy sector, particularly in the first budget period. With regard to our homes, changes in our lifestyles and work patterns sees many of us now spending more time at home. Hybrid working and increasing cost of fossil fuels highlights the need for our homes to become far more energy efficient. This is a win-win as an action. Implementing current plans and measures for the installation of almost 700,000 heat pumps by 2030, as well as retrofitting almost 500,000 homes, will achieve a 41.5% reduction in residential emissions in 2030. Moving on to transport, the end of COVID travel restrictions is projected to result in transport emissions really rebounding. And we're talking about an increase of 18 to 19% from 2020 to 2022. It's not surprising when you look at the complete, stopping of transport during COVID, but it just shows you that rebound effect that we're seeing. Emissions for the sector, though, if all policies and plans and measures are delivered as implemented, will show a reduction of almost 40% by 2030. And this includes, for example, increased biofuels, but almost 1 million electric vehicles on the road. So again, really challenging, demanding targets. But urgent implementation of all climate policies and plans in the Climate Action Plan, plus further new measures, are needed for Ireland to meet the Climate Act commitment of 51% reduction by 2030, and ultimately put Ireland on track for climate neutrality by 2050. And of course, this is not an insignificant challenge, particularly given this time frame of 2030. But in the context of the clear message from the IPCC, it is a challenge that we must address, and all sectors have work to do. But also, here it is a huge opportunity. If we look back over the last 100 years, Ireland is a completely different place to what it was in 1921 or 2022. So we know that change can happen. It's within our grasp, but we need to do it and we need to be transforming. So, what we've also seen, and maybe lastly to highlight again the work that EPA have been doing with Yale University on climate change in the Irish mind, what we're seeing decisively is that changes and step up on action on climate change has the almost complete support of the Irish public. People want this to be done. They support actions on climate change. So I suppose it's in all of our hands to deliver. Implementation will require active policy, leadership, investment by government, private sector and individuals. And it really is now an opportunity to take stock post-COVID and speed up and scale up the investment in climate action. So finally, I'd like to thank you all for attending in person and online today for this incredibly important topic that we need to keep at the top of people's minds. So I know you're going to find all of the speakers really interesting. I would encourage you, again, whether online or in person, to actively participate in the Q&A sessions and the discussions as well. So thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to the Minister for Environment, Communications and Climate Change, Eamon Ryan, and we're delighted to have you here, Minister. Thank you.